Here are your instructions for your final project. To begin with, you're going to download two images, one called clouds.jpg, which is on this layer, and one called boot.jpg, which we have on this layer. You're going to start, or I recommend that you start, by creating your image size, and the image size for this project is 1200 by 1800 pixels. Make sure it's pixels. Once you establish an image size, then you can start to build this. You can either open the boot image and create a canvas size 1200 by 1800, or you can just create a blank canvas and start to bring in all of the respective images. Now I'm going to turn off all the layers except for the boot right now. And I'll even turn off the mask on that layer by hitting Shift, click on the mask. There is my original boot graphic. And it may very well be 1200 by 1800, but you'll just need to double check that. Now the way I want you to do this is I want you to go in and create a path using your pen tool. So using the pen tool, create a path around that boot and make it very accurate. I've got one here already, and save it and call it boot. If I highlight that, and I'll actually go into my selection tool just to show you, you can zoom in here and you can see there's quite a bit of accurate detail, making sure that that boot selection is as close as it can be to the shape of the boot. So I can just deselect this by clicking away and go back to my layers. Now based on that layer, or rather based on that path, I created a layer mask. So I'm just going to turn that mask back on, which isolates the boot and gets rid of all the background. Now we're going to use some of that background in another layer. Let me demonstrate down here. So I've duplicated that layer, inverted the mask, and then modified the mask by adding a large blocking black area in the upper half, which is noted by this straight line horizontally going across here. But what I've done with this layer is I've set the ink mode to multiply. So if I turn on that background layer called table color, you'll see the effect of that. What you see here is the shadow and the tone of the table being projected onto the layer below called table color, and that's because I want you to use the mode called multiply. If I turn off the boot, you'll actually see that accentuated there. So using a multiply mode on the second boot layer, the boot shadow, I called it boot shadow multiply, it actually pushes the tones down onto the color below, down onto the layer below. So let me turn on the boot again. So I've isolated the boot, I've isolated the area around the boot, and using layer masks we achieved a colorized background. Now one layer up from the boot background is the sky, and you'll notice that it's blue, but because I put a gradient mask in the sky, because if I turn off that gradient mask, it's got a hard line, and I don't want that. I actually want to gradate it from this background color. So using your gradient tool on your layer mask, so you need to create a new layer mask and then create a gradient which ramps from about here to about there. Then I want you to add or apply to that layer an adjustment layer, and I want it to be hue saturation, and I also want you to link it to the sky, and again you do that with your option key down and clicking between layers. Now if I turn that on, you'll see that I've colorized it. So let me just double click on the properties and let you see the properties. Using hue saturation, check off the colorized box and then just use your slider and find a green similar to the green that I've used here. You could actually type it in. It's 71. Okay, so that's the sky and that's the boot, and you've created one adjustment layer to be custom used only on the sky by attaching it to that layer. The next thing you're going to do is take a photo of yourself, or probably better yet, get somebody else to take a photo of you. And what I recommend is doing it on a flat colored background, or if you go into the hallways in this college here, there's some walls that are painted green. That might be useful because I want you to create a smart object from that photo. And if I double click that smart object, you'll see that I created a layer mask based on the quick selection tool and the refine edge feature. So let me just close that, go back to my image. So again, get somebody to take your photo, isolate you from the background, create a layer mask for that, make it into a smart object, and if I open up the effects here, you can see that I've added a drop shadow effect to the smart object, which gives me a bit of this shadow over here. Now back to the boot again. I want you to colorize that as well using the hue saturation adjustment layer. And you can see with this little arrow I've attached it to the boot, again using my option click command between layers. I'll turn that on, and I've turned the boot a bluish purple, and I want you to do the same. I can show you the settings right here, but the main thing is to make sure you have colorize checked off when you're using the hue saturation adjustment layer. Now I've got a whole nother layer here. I want you to create a layer group for the text, and I've named that layer group my name. If I turn that on, you can see it's got my name and a byline as well as some text on a path. So let me talk about the details of this. For the name, I created a selection and then made a layer mask so that I can make it look like it's going behind the boot for this first name. Paint it white, use impact, and the size will vary depending on the length of your name, but I want you to make it roughly 90% the width of the image as you see here. But do use the font impact and use the color white. For your second name, again use the font impact and use a light purple such as I've used here. And for the byline, I want you to use area type. In other words, click and drag to create an area for that text to go into. Again, use impact. In this case, you can use 18 point and use a turquoise color. Now let me talk about the effects applied to each of these layers. I'm just going to drop these down. It's basically a drop shadow for the name and the second name, but the first year animation is using a stroke layer style. And I want you to make it 4 pixels, and I want you to make it white. Okay, so we've got layer styles on all of the text here, drop shadows and strokes, and let me go down to this layer right here, which is text on a path. So you'll need to use your pen tool, create a wavy line that imitates the bottom of that boot, and type in digital images dash and your group, whether it's group A or B. This is Myriad Pro, and it's 22 points, and I want you to make it white, and I want you to add a drop shadow. And the last little detail at the top are these little bullets on the corners. So I want you to create a sphere visually about that size. Use a radial gradient to give it a 3-dimensional look, white to black, and also add an outer glow. So you can see here I've used the outer glow. I've increased the size a bit. So layer style is outer glow for the spheres. Put one on each corner, and that would be the topmost layer. Now if I collapse these, again you'll get a good idea of the layer structure of this file. And again, make sure you put all of the text inside of a layer group as I've done here. And that is the criteria for your final assignment.